I'm pregnant. Then you know what needs to be done. Throwing down a thick bundle of bills, the man disappeared. And 13 years later, he was stunned when he heard, "We welcome you to our channel and invite you to watch a video with our new original story." Fernando Marquez opened his eyes, as always, exactly at 7 a.m. and immediately got out of bed, not allowing himself to lie in it for a single extra moment. His entire life was subordinated to a routine established once and for all many years ago. The more creative a person's profession, the more order there should be around him, his father had taught him many years ago. Once and for all, forget all that nonsense about shaggy, unshaven artists and unwashed poets who sleep during the day and wander through gardens at night seeking inspiration in long, unwashed shirts. That's all fiction for romantic admirers. A creative person is simply obligated to be neat and organized. How would Mozart, for example, have managed to create 18 operas alone, living only 35 years, if he had wandered around at night listening to some birds? Only strict routine and self-control will allow talent to make something worthwhile out of a person. The examples of great figures of world art deeply embedded themselves in the consciousness of the then still very young Fernando. He completely agreed with his father, and indeed always tried to live according to a proven routine. Today was no exception. Everything proceeded according to the usual daily scenario: getting up, morning exercises, the obligatory glass of warm water with honey on an empty stomach, and a contrast shower. Fernando carefully washed his face, neatly shaved his cheeks and chin, adjusted his already perfect part, and habitually, attentively peered at his reflection in the mirror. The years, of course, made themselves known. What a joke! 50 was not far off. Half a life, essentially, had passed. Gray hair stubbornly crept into his still thick, but no longer as unruly as in youth strands, and his beard, which he had once liked so much, was now mercilessly shaved off for the same reason, because of the gray. Wrinkles, though not yet very noticeable, but still obvious, had already run in shallow furrows across his forehead and from his eyes to his temples. He was clearly aging, and yet, flirting a little with himself, he couldn't help but admit that he was doing it quite effectively. His face, with regular features, slightly gaunt, habitually raised upward, was still beautiful. But not picturesquely, not cloyingly, but nobly. He had always appealed to women and knew this perfectly well, and over the years his popularity among ladies of all ages and social positions had not diminished at all. He had enough self-criticism and self-irony to acknowledge that he owed his popularity primarily to his pedigreed appearance. By nature, he was not only handsome in face, but also broad-shouldered, well-built, with perfect proportions, thick shining hair, and expressive eyes of a deep greenish-brown shade. Having received all this from several generations of ancestors, Fernando carefully protected his inheritance and always, except for some unfortunate periods of his life, took care of himself as of the greatest treasure. He maintained excellent physical form, cared for his skin, regularly visited doctors, followed a diet, never abused strong drinks, and only rarely smoked when experiencing some really serious shocks. However, he also tried to stay away from serious shocks because nothing ages a person like unnecessary and usually completely useless worries. The result of all this was a body that some 18-year-old youths could envy, not to mention peers, most of whom had long acquired second chins and beer bellies, as well as a face that married women secretly sighed over when remembering it. Unmarried women openly and with pleasure looked at him when they met, wondering how old he really was. The morning procedure and critical but not unpleasurable contemplation of himself in the mirror always gave Fernando a sense of calm and confidence. Again and again he convinced himself that he looked and felt excellent, that he was completely healthy, and therefore everything was still ahead, and he had not lost either time or the opportunity to do what he had dreamed of all his life, namely, to become famous. Once more casting a glance at himself in the mirror, Fernando nodded with satisfaction and went to have breakfast. The morning meal, like everything in his life, was orderly and measured. Only healthy and natural products, minimal heat treatment, and coffee. Fernando neatly finished his drink, put the mug on the table, and mechanically straightened the edge of the kitchen tablecloth, and suddenly, unexpectedly, banged his hand on the table, jumped up and began pacing around the small kitchen space. He was tired of pretending to himself, trying with all his might to act as if nothing had happened, as if everything in his life was going as usual. He had awakened today not at all because morning had come. Frankly speaking, he hadn't even fallen asleep, having lain all night staring at the ceiling. The reflection of his own face in the mirror had brought him no satisfaction at all. A clearly aging but desperately trying to look young little man was looking at him. And all these stupid tricks, gymnastics, protein, and omega-fat-rich foods. All this was powerless before the realization that life had been lived in vain, wasted completely talentlessly. Yesterday had completely thrown him off track. This was obvious. And no matter how much he portrayed calm and composure to himself, he remembered every minute what a shock he had experienced several hours ago. Fernando Marquez was an artist and had been involved in art all his life. Moreover, it seemed that he was born to take brushes in his hands as early as possible, create an unprecedented masterpiece, and shake humanity. Although Fernando was born into a family far from creative circles, no, of course, both father and mother were educated, intelligent people, read a lot, tried at least once a month as self-respecting people to get out to theaters, concerts, and sometimes even made it to exhibitions of famous artists. But they themselves were not particularly passionate about anything. And if they had any artistic talents, unfortunately, without development, they slumbered deep inside. Esteban was a professor of economics, taught at one of the city's universities, and although he had not contributed anything new of his own to the development of science, he was not inclined to destroy others' work either, and calmly year after year instilled basic truths in students, and then checked at exams how they had absorbed these very truths, and was quite satisfied with his life. Mama Valentina, who had once married graduate student Marquez, while still a student herself, idolized her husband, considered him an unquestionable authority in all matters. And the only one who could displace Esteban in her heart was her son Fernando. Fernando was their only child, long awaited and hard won. From the first second of his appearance in the world, he was surrounded by love, care, and universal admiration. He was solemnly proclaimed the most charming and wonderful child in the world. As a baby, Fernando indeed gave plenty of reasons for enthusiastic cooing around himself. He was a charming, chubby, curly-haired little one who seemed to have stepped off an Easter card. Valentina didn't let the boy out of her arms. She sang songs to him all day long, and after just a couple of months after birth, confidently declared to her husband that their son almost flawlessly repeated entire musical phrases after her. Esteban looked doubtfully at Fernando, who was blowing bubbles like any normal child, and laughed. "Well, Valentina, you're really going too far. Maybe I should run and buy him a piano. Let him crawl on it. Get used to it. You can laugh as much as you want, only I know for certain, I'm just sure that Fernando has perfect pitch," declared Valentina adoringly, looking at her son. And so it began. Everything the baby did was analyzed in the smallest details and became unusual, brilliant, unprecedented. If Fernando managed to dump porridge from his plate, smear himself with it, and also cover his table and chair with it, Valentina invariably saw the contours of fantastic trees and birds in the mass smeared by the child's palm. Toys, too, in Mama's opinion, were scattered not just randomly, but with deep artistic intent. In the baby's rocking and clumsy movements, she saw dance steps, and even in Fernando's deafening roar when offended, she clearly heard melodies. In general, Valentina was a typical, slightly abnormal young mother for whom the child had become the light in the window, the only meaning of her existence. Esteban was initially alarmed, seeing such excessive dissolution of his wife and their son, and then waved his hand. After all, you really can't force a person to love someone less than they want to, he reasoned. Fernando will grow up, Valentina will calm down, and everything will be with us like with everyone else. But Valentina categorically refused to look at her son as an ordinary child. And when Fernando turned 5, she finally decided on the question of which particular talent the boy expressed most strongly. "Esteban, Fernando draws magnificently," she confidently declared to her husband. "Here, look, he has obvious talent, and this needs to be developed. Just look at this. This is what he drew. Trees. This is a cat. And this." Valentina touched the album sheet lying slightly to the side with almost sacred reverence. This is my portrait. Just look how accurately and precisely he captured my features. This is simply amazing. Esteban looked with habitual doubt at several sheets of paper laid out before him, which were covered with what seemed to him the most ordinary childish scribbles. On the drawing that, in Valentina's opinion, was her own portrait, there was a large crooked oval with colored blots that apparently indicated eyes, mouth, nose, and thick bright blush. Allowing in his head that perhaps he simply didn't understand anything about painting, Esteban, to calm Valentina, sighed admiringly. You see, she immediately bloomed with a rapturous smile. I knew you would understand right away, too. Fernando is very gifted, so starting Monday, we're going with him to art school. Valentina's maternal intuition didn't let her down. She really brought Fernando where he needed to be. The boy enthusiastically drew, and the art school teacher nodded approvingly, looking at the little student's work. Oh, you can't imagine, Valentina would tell Esteban breathlessly in the evenings after another trip to the art studio, what Norberto said about Fernando today. Just imagine, the teacher asked him how his weekend went, and Fernando, instead of telling, suddenly started drawing. Norberto showed me this drawing. It's simply stunning. A gray-blue blurred picture with pale yellow, pink little rays, lightning bolts. Remember, Fernando complained on Saturday that his head hurt, and he felt some weakness, didn't even go for a walk. So that's exactly what he drew. His condition. Norberto says this is simply amazing, and that this is a sign of high artistic giftedness, since it's easier for him to draw than to explain in words. Valentina, please calm down a bit, Esteban pleadingly asked, seeing his wife's agitation. Otherwise, you'll go crazy before Fernando becomes a brilliant artist. Everything's a joke to you, Valentina waved her hands indignantly, but I'm convinced that Fernando really is a genius. Whether his giftedness was brilliant is hard to say, but after just a couple of years, Fernando Marquez was considered one of the most capable students of the art school. Several of his works were permanently displayed on the studio's exhibition board for public viewing, and to Valentina's pleasure and pride, invariably caused admiration among both adults and children. He became a regular participant and winner of various competitions and showcases of young talents. Time passed. Fernando continued to study, draw, and show great promise. Mama continued to adore her son and wait for her beloved and precious child to shake the world community with an unprecedented masterpiece. Father treated his son somewhat skeptically, however, supporting Fernando's efforts in Valentina's dreams. Fernando finished school and naturally entered the art academy with a reputation as one of the most promising students. Despite his obvious talent and special expectations from those around him, Fernando didn't shine at the academy. No, he, of course, studied well, completed all educational programs and assignments, and invariably received praise for his work, but nothing more. You know, Mom, he explained to Valentina, I don't see the point in scattering myself now. Why should I turn myself inside out, so that all the laurels go to some of my professors? Very necessary. Let them give me technique, give me theory, I'll get my diploma, and then I'll really spread my wings. Only then these will be my works alone, understand? Only mine, and no one else's, and no one will be able to latch on to them. Valentina nodded and looked at Fernando adoringly. In material terms, Fernando didn't need to worry about his future. Esteban, unexpectedly for everyone and first of all for himself, suddenly began earning more than decent money. His still student developments, which for many years seemed exclusively theoretical and interesting only to a very narrow circle of specialists, unexpectedly turned out to be in demand. Neither Valentina nor especially Fernando, for whom the word mathematics had caused toothache since first grade, had ever been interested in this and didn't even try to understand what exactly the head of their family was doing. The main thing was that after several years, Esteban Marquez was a co-owner of a small firm providing businessmen with consulting services on converting their assets into securities. The family unexpectedly became well off, which incredibly delighted and literally inspired Valentina. Well, now absolutely nothing can prevent Fernando from becoming a great artist, she exclaimed. He doesn't need to waste time on trifles. Think about how to make a living. He can concentrate completely only on art. Frankly speaking, Fernando didn't concentrate completely only on art. In addition to painting, his sphere of interest constantly included numerous girls whose heightened attention he invariably enjoyed. And how could it be otherwise? An artist, witty, always with money, maybe not such great money, but against the background of eternally struggling peers living often on one stipend alone, rolling up to the academy building in style in his own car, Fernando looked more than advantageous. But even this wasn't the main thing. Girls were drawn to him like a magnet because of his appearance. He was a real handsome man, simultaneously resembling all the most attractive movie stars of the country and abroad. He was always magnificently and fashionably dressed. Well, how could one resist? So in fun and light romances that fortunately had no consequences for the girls and meant nothing to Fernando even more so, his years of study flew by. He presented his thesis work for the commission's judgment, received restrained praise, and a document about graduating from the academy. The day after the cheerful graduation celebration, graduate artist Fernando Marquez stood in his own studio, bought and equipped, of course, with father's money as a gift to his son in honor of beginning independent life. Before him on an easel stood a clean canvas that was supposed to finally reveal to the world all the power of Fernando's talent. In his head, a bit foggy from yesterday's revelry in the circle of classmates, some vague images and visions were floating. Fernando looked doubtfully at his slightly trembling hand with a bundle of brushes clutched in it, and shaking his head, put them on the table. Creating a masterpiece was obviously postponed, especially since it was necessary to first finish celebrating the academy graduation and come to a normal, calm working state. After a couple of months, it seemed to him that he had finally achieved that very necessary mood for work. Confident in his strength and giftedness, he wasn't going to make preliminary sketches, but intended to paint directly on canvas. He decisively raised a sharply sharpened pencil and lowered it. His head, just recently full of ideas and plans, was completely empty. His eyes, which several seconds ago had clearly seen a practically finished painting before them, now senselessly fixed on the gray surface of the premiere. Fernando suddenly felt that he was now incapable of drawing even the simplest children's picture. "Nothing terrible," he answered his own amazement. "I'm just overtired. I need to rest a little more. And I'll definitely start working. A little later. I have time. I have my whole life ahead of me." And what could be said when his recent acquaintance, Aurelia, a girl of stunning beauty, was already entering the studio door? Aurelia stayed for the night, then for another one, and another. She extremely liked the surrounding studio atmosphere, all this unusual picturesque disorder, and the endless kisses on the big sofa, which invariably turned into something more, seemed especially delightful to her when she remembered that the handsome guy sitting before her was a talented artist who, importantly, had a quite well-off dad. However, as life showed, Fernando was not an impressionable and naive fool, and never for a minute deluded himself about the true feelings of beauty Aurelia toward him. As soon as the girl demanded to declare some special rights, he threw her out of the studio without unnecessary words and without a drop of regret. Left alone, he put before himself an easel on which a completely clean canvas continued to stand. And again, some apathy, powerlessness fell upon Fernando, who just recently was raring to fight, bubbling with ideas and desire to splash them out in colors. It was as if he was instantly emptied again, his strength and abilities taken away. What the hell is this, really? He got angry at himself and, stubbornly sticking his chin forward, began to work. The first painting he painted as a professional artist pleased those who saw it, but nothing more. It was a city landscape, an evening street in the uneven light of a lamp reflected in wet pavement. Everything was depicted with very competent technique, work with color, composition, texture, forms. Everything was good, but it was just a flat image in paint on a piece of fabric. All this, both the wet pavement with glints of dim light and the shadow from the lamp, and the houses seemingly leaning over the street, and even the female figure with a bright red umbrella, all this had already been painted by dozens, if not hundreds of artists before him, and they did it exactly the same way he did. The painting lacked the most important thing: life. "You, my dear talented daubers, remember once and for all," Fernando recalled the words of an old professor, "a painting must be alive, Otherwise, it's worth nothing. For example, if you paint the sea and your viewer involuntarily holds their breath, afraid of choking, then you can consider that you've succeeded with the element. This especially concerns you, Marquez. Suddenly, the professor literally drilled Fernando with his gaze from behind his glasses. You like to paint water, don't you? And it must be admitted, you do it quite well. But you're still very far from the ideal. Make the surface shine, shimmer, tremble. The viewer should feel the watery moisture with their skin, not read on a plaque under the painting that it's painted. The first independent canvas finally created by Fernando didn't pull toward a masterpiece. It was simply a well-executed painting that father hung with pleasure in his firm's reception, joking that he was finally beginning to get at least some return from years of investment in his genius son. So my time just hasn't come yet. I'm just not ready yet for that very main work of mine, Fernando decided after several days of agonizing thoughts about his creativity. Women like Aurelia began appearing in his life with regular constancy, and just like her, they left no trace in it. These girls were united by one thing: they were all incredibly beautiful. And here's what's surprising. Despite all their dazzling advantages and perfect facial features, he never once wanted to paint any of them. He was constantly surrounded by people, was a recognized and indispensable member of several numerous and noisy companies. His stormy romances with beauties were discussed no less than football matches, and managers of the best hotels and restaurants knew him by sight and respectfully called him by name despite his youth. And only Fernando Marquez himself knew how lonely he was in the midst of all this endless chatter and brilliant bustle, and how uninteresting and unnecessary all these beauties were to him, with whom he woke up and whom he had long stopped distinguishing from each other. However, one woman did hook him so much that he almost gave in. Clarissa was not only blindingly beautiful, but also very smart and knew quite clearly what she wanted. And she wanted to marry a talented and promising, and preferably not old person, and move with him to permanent residence in the USA or Europe. Fernando met her selection criteria in many parameters, and importantly, he was young and very attractive, and they looked magnificent together. Many spoke of his talent, but Clarissa, who was, as already said, a very smart girl, wasn't going to rely only on words. She wanted to be sure of this before deciding on such a serious step as marriage. Clarissa's father worked in the Ministry of Culture and, of course, helped his daughter with her plans. The girl energetically set about promoting Fernando's fame, literally forced him to work, arranged for his works to appear in the most famous galleries, and even at auctions. It was then that it became clear that Fernando was just a talented dilettante, and his paintings seriously interested no one. Having convinced herself of this, Clarissa, not without regret, explained herself to Fernando and fluttered out of his life forever. It seemed to Fernando that life was over. Along with Clarissa, it seemed, went the last hope of becoming someone greater than that same Marquez. Well, remember, the one who drew water best at the academy. So colleagues mockingly gossiped about Fernando behind his back. Years passed inexorably and incredibly quickly. Fernando still earned a reputation as a decent artist, participated in exhibitions, even received a laureate at one of the creative competitions. But all this was completely incomparable to what he had dreamed of in his youth and at the very beginning of his creative career. He regularly painted pictures, received positive reviews, even quite profitably sold them, but nothing more. He was quite critical of himself and honestly admitted that so far he was just a craftsman, one of hundreds of artists whose name was known only to narrow specialists in a small circle of acquaintances. He suffered and wondered, because he really was talented, very gifted. He had always known this, felt it, understood it. Everyone around him had always told him this from childhood. Why then did he, so talented, almost brilliant, become a bungler and dauber as soon as he found himself before a canvas? What was wrong with him? Could he have been mistaken? Could everyone have been deceiving him all these years and he wasn't an artist at all, but was only good for illustrating advertisements? And if this was so, then what should he do? After all, he was no longer a promising 18-year-old youth. He was almost 35. Half his life had passed. Could everything have been meaningless? And he still hadn't written anything worthwhile, not because the time for it simply hadn't come yet, but because he, Fernando Marquez, was simply talentless. These thoughts almost drove him mad. Maybe he would have reached something bad, but then an unexpected turn happened in his life. It was one of those meaningless exhibitions where his works were presented among paintings by other authors. Fernando understood that mainly random, bored people came here who simply hadn't found anything more interesting that day. He habitually wandered through the halls, observed the public, tried to remember his fantasies, and suffered in advance from his powerlessness to convey them on canvas. He had walked through the entire gallery back and forth several times, and once again, returning to one of his paintings, stopped his gaze on a short female figure. She had been here for quite a while. At least during this time, he had managed to leave and return a couple of times, and she still continued to stand motionlessly before his canvas. It was another landscape depicting his favorite theme, a lonely wandering figure, twilight, surfaces of pavement and benches wet from rain, and window light reflected many times in puddles. And again the image lacked life, brilliance, lightness. It was neither good nor bad. This image simply was, like thousands of others, and didn't catch anything. But the woman, rather girl as he could see, stubbornly stood before this painting, as if trying to see something in it invisible at first glance. Fernando approached closer, stood next to the stranger, and inconspicuously squinted in her direction. The girl had the most ordinary, one could even say unremarkable appearance. Light, straight, long hair lay freely on both sides of her head, falling on her face. Their owner constantly repeated the same movement, slightly tilting and shaking her head and throwing strands of hair back from her face. It was clear that this was a habitual movement for her, which she did automatically. When the thick hair flew back once again, a slightly elongated, clean face, without the slightest trace of makeup, was revealed to those around, with large gray eyes, a slightly upturned nose, and lips that were too narrow, in Fernando's opinion, as a lover of full-lipped beauties. And all of her, with her short, thin, rather boyish figure, sharp elbows, and thin legs, was very far from that ideal of female beauty to which he was so accustomed in his life. From the point of view of the relationships between man and woman that were usual for him, the stranger could not interest Fernando in any way. But he wasn't going to get acquainted with her with the intention of courting. He was intrigued by the attentive, almost unblinking gaze with which the girl, without looking away, drilled his painting. "Excuse me," he said and coughed quietly. "May I ask you what you found so special in this, so to speak, daub?" He had difficulty pronouncing the unflattering word for himself. "Well, what are you saying? This isn't a daub," came a quiet, slightly husky, as if slightly cold voice in response. "This is a very good painting. It's just missing something, you understand? Something very important. Just literally 2 or 3 details, strokes, and it would immediately breathe, come alive. I don't know how to explain it to you, but it's as if the one who painted it didn't quite endure, didn't finish, abandoned it. Probably the artist got tired of it. So now it hangs here so dull, lifeless. But it could have been completely different." Fernando looked at the girl in shock, then shifted his gaze to his creation. "Interesting," he squeezed out. "Very interesting. And what, in your opinion, can be done here? How to fix it?" "And there's no way," the stranger waved her hand. "It seems to me that this artist simply doesn't love what he paints. He himself doesn't really like what's on his paintings, so everything turns out somehow flat, dead, you know. So in your opinion, he," Fernando nodded at the canvas, "well, that is, this artist, should love passionately and recklessly everything he paints? Is that it? This house, lamp, puddle, yes? Of course, but not in the literal sense, of course." She became embarrassed. "But what he paints, he should like it. He should admire it, enjoy it, love it. Then everything on the painting will be real and beautiful." "Interesting theory," Fernando drawled. "Only artists don't draw. They paint. That's how you should say it correctly. Well, since you're such a connoisseur of painting." "Oh, well, what are you saying? What kind of connoisseur am I?" She smiled embarrassedly and suddenly became incredibly prettier. Her pale face lit up with a thin porcelain blush. Beautiful white teeth flashed, and her eyes became even bigger, seeming to occupy half her face. I ended up here completely by accident. Like most of those present, Fernando nodded. Well, why are you looking at this particular painting so intently? I'm curious to know. After all, there are so many that is, creations here. I don't know, something in it caught me, she answered seriously, again shifting her gaze to Fernando's painting. You know, this is probably nonsense, my fantasies, but for some reason it seems to me that the author of this painting is beautiful and talented, but not very happy. Although outwardly everything is very good with him, and he himself doesn't like how he painted all this. And for some reason, it also seems to me that he's lonely. That's it. Fernando sighed deeply and also shifted his gaze to his landscape. Now it will turn out that all this is just an amusing, though quite cruel prank by one of his acquaintances. This young lady was told about him. By the way, if this is really so, then it's simply vile. They brought her to his specific painting and asked her to wait for him here, and then so cruelly, inhumanly poke at his sore spots. He straightened up and looked around, searching for familiar faces, among which should be that very Joker. But there was no one around except this strange girl saying amazing things. If we assume that she wasn't sent by anyone, it turns out that she's simply reading his entire life from his painting, which, like a bitter pill, is wrapped in shiny paper. Who are you? He asked the girl in shock. Luna, she smiled, as if not even surprised by his question. Luna, he repeated as if tasting the name. May I invite you, let's say to a cafe or restaurant? Why? She was sincerely and somehow very amusingly amazed. Well, I just really want to discuss with you the fate of this wayward artist, he again expressively pointed to his painting, and also possible ways to save him. He was amazed by his own words. Luna was the complete opposite of all those women he had dealt with until now. He couldn't even imagine that he would ever find himself next to someone like her. He didn't understand what was happening to him, why he suddenly painfully wanted to take her hand. So thin, small, apparently even without manicure, and press it to his lips, and then hear again this low, slightly hoarse, strange voice that didn't suit her at all. The girl looked at him with no less amazement, shifted her eyes to the painting, then again to him, and suddenly pressed her thin, narrow palm to her face. And then he understood that he didn't want this funny and plain girl to simply disappear from his life. Simply no one had ever looked at his paintings with such attention and participation as Luna did. And only she, understanding absolutely nothing about art and painting, somehow managed to see in his unfortunate canvases him himself as he really was. Luna entered his life quietly and imperceptibly, as sunlight enters a dark house in the morning, as fresh air penetrates into a stuffy room. She loved Fernando sincerely and recklessly, without calculations, and it suddenly seemed to him that she was exactly what he needed. Luna, I love you, he said one day. I will never part with you. Really? Asked Luna. I also love you very much, Fernando. Very, very much. And I'm so happy. Looking at Luna, her thin, boyish, almost childish figure, he for some reason experienced feelings no weaker than those that overwhelmed him during romances with gorgeous beauties. But at the same time, his attitude toward Luna was something completely new, never before experienced. She evoked in Fernando trembling, excitement, tenderness. She inspired him. And finally he decided, Luna, may I paint you? I want to make your portrait, you understand? But maybe not quite your portrait, not an exact portrait. But I need you. I want you to pose for me. Me? The girl was amazed. You've lost your mind? What a model you found. And who was it who said I have neither skin nor face? Luna laughed. Luna? Well, you understand, that was just a joke. Luna, you're extraordinary. You yourself don't know what you are. And in general, it sometimes seems to me that you're a witch, a sorceress, that you've bewitched me. Only I can't understand with what. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Just come to me. That evening, they never did start working. Both the artist and the future model were too exhausted by each other. But the painting still came to life. Fernando had never worked like this in his life, neither before nor after. The work completely captured him, covered him head to toe, It seemed all his senses and organs shut down. Only his fingers remained, obedient to his every thought, and his eyes, seeing everything. He didn't want to eat or drink, didn't notice the change of day and night, felt no fatigue. He painted without sketches or studies, decisively and boldly, throwing strokes of paint on the canvas, and his artistic image, exactly as he saw it in dreams and fantasies, obediently emerged from the depths of the canvas. The painting depicted a thin female figure in a bright red dress, tightly fitting on top, with a full, seemingly flying skirt. The girl's figure seemed frozen in a dance pirouette, with thin, almost transparent arms raised upward, turned to the viewer in three-quarter profile. Her shoulders were drawn back, and all of her, slightly arched as if falling, held herself in space by some incredible effort and seemed about to break away. The sensation of continuing movement was so strong that the viewer involuntarily also began to move restlessly, as if wanting to step forward to be closer and catch the careless girl if she indeed began to fall. She looked slightly sideways over her shoulder, somewhere past the viewer, into space, with her gray eyes glistening moistly and smiling slightly with thin lips. And for some reason one painfully wanted to catch, turn to oneself this gaze, understand its meaning, and laugh joyfully in response. Trying to do this, many involuntarily stretched their necks, and immediately catching themselves at this, embarrassedly shrank back. She was painted with thin, barely noticeable transparent strokes and paints, like a shadow, a dream, a reverie, and only the incredible, literally blazing dress in all shades of noble deep red helped believe that the girl was real and not woven from mist. The bright dress and pale skin created an incredible contrast of strength, power and tenderness, cry and silence, calm and celebration, and one wanted to gaze into this contrast endlessly. It excited, fascinated, and attracted like a magnet. The painting created a real sensation. People came to look at it many times, discussed it. Several articles in serious art criticism publications were dedicated to it. About Fernando Marquez, they again spoke as one of the most talented artists of his generation. They discussed his distinctive manner, expression, special style, and unusual color solution. But behind all these professional terms and judgments stood one most important thing. This was a real masterpiece, unique and inimitable. On the wave of his success, Fernando painted several more works, but they didn't come close to the girl in impact on the viewer. But this was unimportant. Fernando continued to bask in the rays of fame and success. Luna was nearby, like an affectionate kitten, like a ray of sunshine or a favorite blanket. And this felt incredibly good. Surprisingly, he knew almost nothing about her, except that she had no relatives except a very old grandmother, with whom she lived in a tiny apartment somewhere in the depths of the city's old lanes. Luna worked as a nurse in a clinic, dreamed of becoming a doctor, read books voraciously, cooked amazingly delicious tamales, and absolutely didn't know how to use cosmetics. "I don't want to know anything more about you," he laughed. "It seems to me that the less I know, the more I need you." And she mostly remained silent, but knew how to say with this silence sometimes much more than others, with 1,000 words and screaming. A few days after another successful exhibition for him, Clarissa unexpectedly entered the studio with a soft, feline gait. The woman whom once, as it seemed to him, he had loved very much. "Marquez, how glad I am to see you," Clarissa sang out. She always called him by his surname, even then, several years ago, during their promising romance. She couldn't stand the name Fernando, considered it too simple, suitable only for domestic use. "They say you've finally come to your senses and still became a real artist." Clarissa smiled condescendingly. "Where are you from?" Fernando asked in amazement. Over the years during which they hadn't seen each other, Clarissa had become even more beautiful, though it seemed this was impossible. And this beauty unexpectedly responded in Fernando with a wave of desire. "If you're interested in where exactly," Clarissa answered, "then I'm straight from Germany and came right to you." "Did you miss me?" she suddenly asked bluntly. Fernando nodded, feeling how he was falling under the hypnosis of those carefully made-up eyes. "Listen, Marquez, I read articles about you. All this is quite serious. You did well. She performed applause. But still, this is small scale. Wouldn't you like to reach the international level? That is. Fernando was amazed. Well, what are you saying? That's impossible. I'm not some honorary member of the Artists' Union or honored, so that foreign exhibitions would be arranged for me. Especially since I have only one truly worthwhile work so far. Who would organize an exhibition, and abroad at that, for one painting by an almost unknown artist? What do your state offices have to do with it? I'm suggesting something completely different, Clarissa shrugged. My husband? Yes, dear. Yes, I'm married. What did you think? That I'd wait for you or something? Clarissa smirked, noticing his amazement. So, my current husband is German, co-owner of an exhibition center in Berlin. If you want, I can arrange for you and your girl in blue an honorary place in the central gallery. In red, Fernando automatically corrected, not yet quite grasping the meaning of her words. My painting is called Girl in a Red Dress. It doesn't matter what she's wearing there, Clarissa interrupted impatiently. The main thing is that she and you will be seen in Europe. There you see, there's a fashion again for artists from Latin America, and you with your big eyes will simply create a sensation there. I'm sure of this. So do you agree? Did he agree to have his best painting exhibited in the central exhibition gallery of one of Europe's cultural centers? Was she joking? For this, he himself would agree to carry his painting on foot to Berlin and further if necessary. But the offer itself was too incredible to be disinterested, and Clarissa didn't look at all like a good fairy. Well, what do you want from me for this? Fernando asked cautiously. Clarissa smiled dazzlingly and, spinning around the studio, fell onto the sofa, effectively throwing one endlessly long leg over the other. Old good acquaintance, this is all the same, isn't it? She cooed, expressively stroking the sofa surface with her palms. How much it must remember of all sorts of amusing and pleasant things, eh? Come here, Marquez. Why are you standing there like a stranger? Sit next to me, offer the lady a drink, and let's discuss my proposal, so to speak, in detail. So what do you still want? Fernando asked again, involuntarily taking a couple of steps toward Clarissa, who had settled on the sofa. Oh, Lord Marquez, you finally become an artist, but at the same time it seems you've become catastrophically stupid. I always needed only one thing from you. Clarissa's perfectly outlined eyebrow barely moved. Yes, actually, you can't give me anything else. You know, it's strange, but it seems I really missed you, so immediately come to me and kiss me. Well, why are you standing there like a stump? Aren't you melting with happiness? Clarissa left the studio after a couple of hours, carefully renewing her lipstick and fixing her considerably damaged hairstyle. And Fernando, completely exhausted, stunned, and understanding nothing, sat in one place for a long time, looking into space. Finally, his gaze came somewhat to life, and wandering around the studio, fixed on the painting Girl in a Red Dress, which Clarissa had glanced at only in passing. What should I do? Fernando asked himself. How should I be with Luna now? If I go abroad, what will happen to her? What special thing could happen to her? His second eye suddenly answered. She'll live the same way she lived before meeting you, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'd better answer yourself honestly, Marquez. Are you ready to give up for Luna's sake everything you've dreamed of all your life? Big money, fame, glory, real, public, international. And as for faithfulness to her as a woman, well, you actually just gave that up for Clarissa. So don't be cunning with yourself. You never loved Luna. And indeed, you can't, a grown man, seriously believe in her crazy theories about how an artist can only paint what he loves himself. And Luna herself, it's unlikely she loves me so much, Fernando continued reasoning. She pitied me, warmed me, encouraged me, even inspired me. It's like with a stray cat. Great, but enough. Thank you all. Everyone's free, as they say. It's even better for her this way. Well, what kind of husband am I, really? I never wanted a family or children, especially with a woman like Luna. But really, honestly, you can't even go anywhere with her. Well, how would he look with her at official events? But Clarissa, that's a completely different matter. After all, she's amazing. Fernando, are you home? Luna's voice was heard. Listen, Luna, I have stunning news, he began decisively. This is very important. Yes, and I also have news for you. And also stunning, Luna answered, her eyes shining. Well, okay, you go first. You understand, I've been invited to Germany. They're offering to exhibit my painting in the Central Gallery of Berlin. You could just go crazy, he announced. How do you feel about this? You won't be too upset? I'll have to leave for a month or two, maybe even longer. Luna continued to look at him with eyes shining with love. It seemed that for her, there really was nothing more important than what Fernando needed. Well, of course, Fernando. What are you talking about? She exclaimed. I understand everything. This is such a chance for you. You fully deserve this. I'm sure you'll achieve huge success, both with the girl and with your new paintings. After all, you're a brilliant artist. Of course, agree, go, and we'll wait for you. Fernando stopped abruptly and looked at Luna. Who is we? He asked. Well, you understand. Luna blushed and lowered her eyes and immediately, happily sniffling, raised them to Fernando. This is actually my stunning news. Fernando, I'm pregnant. Can you imagine? I'm going to have your child. We're going to have a baby. Luna spread her arms, clearly expecting Fernando to joyfully gasp, jump up and rush to embrace her. But he was silent, and this silence became more frightening with each second. Yes, this really is stunning news, he finally said, and most importantly, very timely. Fernando approached the table and began sorting through various small items scattered on it that should always be at hand. Finally, throwing aside some brush, he went to the window and stared into the twilight. The silence became unbearable. Fernando, I don't understand. Aren't you happy? Luna silently approached the man and lightly touched his shoulder. I'm happy, he shouted angrily, shaking Luna's hand off his shoulder. You know, I'm so happy I don't know what to do with my joy. Well, imagine, a child. Obviously, I should die of happiness that instead of participating in European exhibitions, I'll be changing diapers and running for baby food. Are you in your right mind? I don't need this. By the end, he was practically yelling at Luna. She, huddled in a ball, sat on the edge of the sofa and looked at Fernando with dry, burning eyes. Fernando, she suddenly heard in her husky voice. I understand. This is all so unexpected and so badly timed. But this is our baby. For me, this is also unexpected. But since it happened this way, what can we do? Have you lost your mind? Why are you playing dumb? You, little girl, don't know what needs to be done in such a case. Get rid of this, do you hear? Immediately. How could you even think that I would agree to this? He stopped pacing around the studio and stopped in front of Luna, still sitting on the corner of the famous sofa. Get rid of it immediately. And don't look at me with the eyes of a beaten dog, do you hear? All this is so stupid and unnecessary that I don't even want to talk about it. Think what you want about me, but I don't need this child. And as compensation for suffering, here, take this, it's all I have. He took a bundle of dollar bills from the table drawer and threw it on the sofa. The money fell next to sitting Luna, and she flinched as if from a blow. After a couple of minutes, she struggled to get up from the sofa, stood, as if with difficulty, through pain, and left the studio, leaving the money where Fernando had thrown it. He flew to Berlin with Clarissa and took the painting, Girl in a Red Dress. Clarissa kept her promises. Fernando's work really was exhibited in a huge exhibition center, and for several months became the center of the exposition. Fernando himself also became a very popular figure for some time. People were pleased to meet him, shake hands, give thumbs up in approval, shove business cards at him. Clarissa was constantly nearby, with a patronizing air holding Fernando by the arm, as if emphasizing her special rights to the young attractive artist from Latin America. Fernando honestly tried to work, because Clarissa demanded new paintings to maintain interest in Fernando. But his professional curse caught up with him again. Beautiful paintings floating in his head lay on canvases as flat, dead, boring images. Girl in a Red Dress remained his only serious work. The stirred interest in the artist from Latin America gradually came to nothing, and along with it, Clarissa cooled toward Fernando. He returned home. More than 10 years have passed since then, and he had heard nothing of Luna since that very evening when the studio door closed behind her, and the cursed bundle of money remained lying on the sofa, and the portrait of the girl in the red dress continued to hang in his studio. He was offered very substantial money for this painting many times, but he didn't agree even to the most interesting offers. He parted with it only very briefly, periodically lending it for some exhibition, and waited with agonizing impatience for its return home. This attachment to the painting was quite strange. It would seem he should have, on the contrary, hurried to get rid of it, so it wouldn't remind him of the past, of memories that sometimes ached like a bad tooth. But he didn't want to part with the painting even briefly, and calmed down only after the girl took her usual place on the studio wall. He simply understood that this painting was essentially the only real work he had created in his entire creative life, and it also depicted the one who had truly loved him. And this, too, had happened only once in his fate. So he lived year after year. Fernando Marquez had invariably been part of the jury of the annual arts competition held among school children, and invariably attracting a huge number of participants for several years in a row. The event was large-scale, conducted in several stages, and identified the best among young musicians, artists, and dancers. Fernando Marquez, as an artist, perhaps not so famous, but professional, and also teaching at an art college, of course, evaluated participants in the visual arts competition. On one of the competition days, he was walking down the corridor of the huge creative center and suddenly stopped unexpectedly. Violin sounds were coming from behind the open door of a small rehearsal hall. The fact itself was more than ordinary. Young violinists, pianists, and guitarists rehearsed continuously, using any opportunity and any free corner. Fernando liked this, and was touched by the serious faces of girls and boys carefully executing complex musical passages on their instruments. But here an adult musician was clearly playing. A complex, fast, rhythmic piece in some Italian or Spanish style was performed confidently, assertively, and with some extraordinary lightness that was literally heard in every sound. The musician seemed to be throwing sounds into space, not thinking for a second about technique, score, as if he wasn't playing someone else's composition, but composing it himself literally at this moment. Struck by this impression, Fernando, instead of habitually passing by another contestant, especially one having no personal relation to him, listened. "Fernando, greetings." A tall, disheveled man stopped next to him and extended his hand. This was the chairman of the musical competition jury, an honored musician, laureate of something, but to his shame, except for the name, Fernando knew almost nothing about him. "Hi, Ricardo," he whispered in response, smiling, and again quickly turned his head to the slightly open door. The man also listened and nodded understandingly. "Listening? I understand. Plays interestingly, nothing to say. No, just listen to what the rascal is doing, changing the part on the go. No, what an impudent fellow, to improvise like that. Old Vieux Tomp is probably turning in his grave right now. After all, he's mutilating his tarantella like that." "No, it's amazing," Ricardo laughed. "And where does the kid get so much audacity? And by the way, the piece between you and me is complex. Healthy heads in the college try to slip away from it. And this one, knee-high to a grasshopper, not only plays it, but also changes it." "Wait, a child is playing?" Fernando was amazed. The more he listened to the performance of the invisible musician-violinist, the more for some reason he became convinced that he was an adult, or at least a teenager. "A boy, 12 years old, can you imagine?" Ricardo laughed. "I couldn't believe it myself when I first heard him. Incredibly gifted kid. Technique, musicality, absolute pitch. In general, a pure diamond. And you know what's funniest? He's not even participating in our violin competition. Just like that." "Then what is he doing here?" Fernando asked in amazement. "Well, you're something," Ricardo laughed for some reason. "He's actually registered with you for paintings. Imagine, he's also an artist. Such a genius has appeared. I keep planning to go to your vernissage to take a look. Interesting how he draws. If it's the same as he plays violin, well, you don't need to torture yourself choosing a winner. You have one." Completely amazed, Fernando quietly peeked into the rehearsal room. By this time, the young virtuoso, having finished performing the piece with a deafening cascade of sounds, was folding the violin and bow into the case. It was a short, thin boy with disheveled light hair. The hair had obviously not been cut for a long time and constantly fell into his face. The boy regularly threw back his head and with a sharp backward movement of his head removed the fringe from his forehead. For some reason, this movement seemed very familiar to Fernando, and the boy himself reminded him of someone long forgotten from the distant past. However, as soon as the incredible sounds of music stopped, the little violinist turned into the most ordinary boy with unremarkable appearance, the same as millions of others, and could indeed remind one of anyone. The guy, noticing Fernando looking at him, glanced around furtively and grabbing the case with the violin, muttered an indistinct "hello" and darted between him and the door into the corridor. Fernando managed to notice a quick glance that slid over him from gray eyes, a light smirk of thin boyish lips, and several funny freckles on his nose. And again, something old stabbed him and responded with dull longing in his heart. Fernando shook his head as if driving away an apparition, followed with his eyes the short, thin figure quickly moving away down the corridor, and again looked at musician Ricardo. "So he's also an artist?" he asked. "Imagine! And they say no less talented than as a musician. Well, however, that's for you to judge. What's his name?" Fernando couldn't help himself, quickly going through in his memory yesterday, during which the jury with him had selected the best works for the new stage of the competition. "His name is Sergio, surname Amador," the musician said. The works signed by young artist Sergio Amador, Fernando naturally remembered. He immediately distinguished them from the general mass. 3 paintings, a landscape, still life, and female portrait, immediately riveted attention. Of course, these weren't paintings by a mature master. They had many technical errors, but these were real paintings that evoked purely human emotions in the viewer. The landscape with a mountain river conveyed the freshness of cold water. You wanted to take the flower in the still life in your hands, smell it, and the beautiful woman in the portrait smiled so that it was impossible not to smile back. These were living paintings, drawn by perhaps a small but already real artist. Fernando, as a professional, was immediately struck by the painting style: bold, broad strokes, with unerring color selection and amazing sense of composition. Looking at these works yesterday, noting their merits, he somehow didn't pay attention to the author's age. Everything was unimportant. Everything receded to the background before the paintings themselves. And now it turns out that the artist who painted them is a 12-year-old boy. "Well, I see you're really confused," Ricardo laughed, whom Fernando had practically forgotten about. "What, can't believe that this long-legged little thing will soon throw us, old mediocrities, into the trash? You know, I'm not threatened by this. He, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, puts music in second place after painting. So I'll still live, chew bread. But you, Fernando, look around. Such replacement is growing up." Ricardo playfully slapped Fernando on the shoulder and ran off on his business. Half an hour later, Fernando was sitting at the visual arts competition jury table and listening to discussions of contestants' works. All commission members unanimously agreed that the best works in all 3 competitive genres were Sergio Amador's paintings. "Simply amazing," the solid lady, art academy teacher, shook her luxurious hairstyle. "Such a snotty kid and already has his own style, and it's just completely impossible to tear yourself away from his paintings. What do you think, Fernando?" "Fernando, yoo-hoo!" the interlocutor called out playfully to him, who wasn't reacting to her words at all. Fernando was far away at that moment. He was peering into young Sergio Amador's paintings and trying to understand the most important thing in them. This was exactly what he, Fernando, had never been able to achieve in his professional life, no matter how he tried. The 12-year-old boy painted inspiredly and sincerely, and his paintings lived, breathed, and rejoiced together with their viewer. "What?" he came to. "Sorry, I was thinking about something." Yes, of course. Very interesting. Very. Absolutely. Very talented kid. Very. And by the way, Patricia, where did he come from? I somehow don't remember seeing him before. After all, I supervise all children's exhibitions, you know, so I've never seen him there." "So you couldn't have seen him," the woman waved her hand. "As far as I know, he recently arrived with his mother. Before this, they lived somewhere in general, somewhere far away. I don't know exactly where. But Sergio's mother, again as far as I know, is a local native, returned to her homeland, well, and brought this miracle here. Fernando no longer heard the woman, but thought about his own things. Yes, the boy named Sergio really was a miracle, a real natural talent who needed to be protected, cherished, and nurtured. How to do this? How to help his parents and the boy himself not to lose, not waste, not exchange this amazing gift for trifles, as happened with himself. After spending a sleepless night and restless morning, Fernando waited for the familiar thin figure with disheveled light head to appear in the corridor of the center of creativity. "Sergio, may I talk with you?" he addressed the boy. He looked seriously at the man and nodded. "My name is Fernando Marquez. I'm an artist." Fernando, for some reason, had difficulty pronouncing the last word, as if fearing that the boy would now snort ironically and laugh. But the boy was naturally still very serious. "Yes, I know, you're a member of our jury," he nodded. "You know, I really liked your works. They're truly interesting," Fernando continued, clearing his throat. "You're still a child, of course, but you're already a real artist." Now, this word sounded confident for Fernando. "I would like to get to know you and your parents better. Is this possible?" "I think so. I'll tell Mama. It's just that we came together. Papa Juan is far away now, abroad." "Papa Juan?" Fernando was surprised by the unusual address. "Well, yes, he's just not my real father, so I call him by name." "That's it," the boy explained calmly. Well, that's understandable." Fernando was terribly embarrassed. "Well, in general, tell your mama my request. I invite you both to my studio. Here's the address." He handed the boy a business card. "A real artist's studio?" The boy's gray eyes lit up with sincere interest. "Great. We'll definitely come. I've never been in a real studio." "Well, that's great. I'll be very glad to receive you and, of course, your mama." Fernando nodded. And again he was stabbed by the anxious feeling that he had once seen these attentive gray eyes gleaming from under light hair. A couple of days later, Fernando, worried, was waiting for Sergio Amador and his mom in his studio. A short, slender woman in an elegant light suit extended Fernando a narrow, graceful hand and smiled warmly from under large, smoky glasses covering half her face. "Your son, he's simply an amazing talent," Fernando was saying, placing a tray with cups before her. "I honestly was stunned by his works. You know, Luna, this might sound immodest, but once I too showed great promise, but nothing came of me. And it seems to me I know why. Don't think I'm pushing myself on you as a mentor, no. Although I'd be happy if Sergio accepts several professional lessons from me. It's not about that. I just so want to help him understand the most important thing. It's hard for me to express this myself, but once long ago, a very dear person told me that an artist must love what he paints, you understand? I understood how true this is too late, and I so want this to remain in your Sergio." "Oh, this girl looks very much like my mama," Sergio suddenly said with curiosity, examining the studio at this time. Fernando, dropping the tray on the floor and not even noticing the crash of breaking glass, sharply stood up and turned to the painting hanging on the wall. To his best painting, the only real work created in his entire life. The keen eyes of the young, talented artist immediately saw what Fernando, who had long stopped looking at the world around him, hadn't seen. "Have I really changed so much, Fernando?" came a husky, low voice behind him. "And about the fact that nothing worked out in your life, drop that, Fernando. Everything is ahead of you. You just need to want and love for real."